Ultra Chill.
Hey guys, welcome to Ultra Chill. This is episode 4. Our CTO, Mike Dunn, is here with us today. We're talking about Wave 2, what it is and why it's been taking so long. We also talked to Mike about how he built out the Ultra R&D team and, of course, how the team deals with prioritization and other tricky details. So make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. It really helps this project grow. There's a ton of interesting details, so let's jump right in, starting with questions about Wave 2. There's been a lot of questions also about Wave 2. Are you guys up for talking us through some of the feature set? I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about why we're doing things this way, and some clarity from you guys would be very helpful.
There is some misunderstanding about the objective of the waves. So for us, the waves are really there to test the platform under different situations, different circumstances, and test different functionalities. While you're developing a platform as broad as Ultra, you constantly battle with development priorities. You choose certain, functionalities to be developed, because it will unlock the ability to develop another functionality behind, when you have dependencies. And so while we keep developing the platform, we just realize that it's not the right time to do the Wave 2, because the Wave 2 has been designed for testing certain functionalities that aren't there because we built other functionalities. So that's kind of like what's happening right now. The platform's not delayed. The development has continued, the progress has continued, but the Wave 2 needs to wait a little bit more while we reach the stage where we actually want to test the next functionalities. So that's kind of like where we are right now.
So the waves are a sort of staggered approach or a throttled approach to be able to make sure that what we put out is going to be rock solid from a user experience perspective.
So I'm actually really excited to have you on the podcast. We've been working together for quite a few years, and I don't know how much exposure the community has actually had to you. For me, it's been a particularly large pleasure. Maybe you'd like to introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about your background, who you are, what you like to do, and what you think your place within the larger context of Ultra has been.
Very experienced CTO within big tech and media companies, but then also within startups and strategic venture groups, where I've worked with tons of startups as a investor, advisor. And so what I saw in Ultra when I first met David and Nicholas was a blockchain project that I really wanted to be involved in. I had done numerous blockchain projects before that. They were Ethereum based, and I could see where the shortcomings were. I'd done lots of big platform and e-commerce based projects, and I'd done massive amount of websites and streaming media and augmented reality, virtual reality, tons of things that were paradigm shifting and popular during their time frame. And what I saw in Ultra was something that I believed was paradigm shifting, and the project was the right approach to what was needed from a user experience and using blockchain as a foundation. I always tell people we're a blockchain company. Everything else we're doing is what sits on top of it. And so what I liked about it, David's an amazing visionary. So the first time I met with him, he gave me the vision, and I agreed to join the project immediately. I had a number of other things I was looking at that looked like the same old really big thing that was already well established. What Ultra was starting at the ground floor, building the entire team, building the framework and the platform and the processes. And I've loved it. I've been doing it 3.5 years with them through the pandemic and all of it.
I think that there's been a lot of thought put into how the Ultra team has been built over the years. And Mike, I know that you've been deeply involved in, a lot of those questions of why the team is structured in the way that it's structured. And I think that how technical teams are built is deeply interesting. I think there's an art to it that isn't talked about enough, at least within the context of Ultra. Can you talk a bit about how you've tackled putting together both a growing team and a team that needs to build something which is deeply, deeply complex?
So I'll start with philosophy. So I have a philosophy about building teams that involves not creating a lot of hierarchical structure, thus not authoritarian. Thus, as CTO, I don't want every decision to come to me and I make the decision and then I tell the people what to do. It's more about influence and hiring really strong leaders within the team and growing that way, so that they can have some influence over the people, the peers they're working with and the people they're working with who are part of their team. That creates a more robust, I guess I'll use hive mind, but you get the aggregate of all your core capabilities versus just always having to go to one really smart person and say, hey, decide everything we're going to do. I view what I do as a lot of orchestration and a lot of directional mentoring most of the time, but I feel pretty comfortable that the engineering leads, the product leads, the people that make up the team are really highly qualified, experienced senior folks that can grasp the complexity of the project, make informed decisions, collaborate well with everybody else on the team. That all comes back to then, if you hire these sorts of people, how do you organize them? And so we started with the belief that an agile approach would be best, a fairly flat organization. So there are times when I participate in meetings where I'm just a participant. I'm not the CTO. I have the CTO title, but in that meeting, I'm going to share some of my experiences or expertise in certain areas, along with everybody else that's going to be sharing theirs. In an agile model, the leads per task or per backlog item change constantly based on who has availability and who has expertise and who has experience maybe inside of the work we're doing. So it's fairly fluid. And some people excel at that and some people don't. So what we look for is people that excel at that. As far as how we're structured, R&D is the group that I oversee, and it's the bulk of the staff at Ultra, and it's made up of product and engineering focused groups. And we organize ourselves into squads. So engineering squads would be things like backend that have expertise in our backend and backend services, the platform we're building, blockchain that own and have experience in developing our blockchain based off a fork of EOS, and then optimizing it for the benefits of the blockchain we want to create that mesh with our business model. Front end, quality assurance, DevOps, those are all engineering-based organizations or groups. They're areas of expertise, and then they get organized into cross-functional squads that have a member of each group to participate when we start working on the work we do, which we break down into what we call backlog items, which is a whole list of things that we go through and prioritize based on the work we're going to do. We organize around Scrum or in sprints with most groups, except for DevOps, which we use a Kanban approach, which is like Post-its that you put on a board, and then you decide what's the highest priority and who's working on stuff, and you move them around based on your needs. A little bit different Agile methodology, but for us, it works well. And I think for the most part, all Agile is hybrid. And the manifesto purists out there will rebel against that. But every company I've ever worked with, big or small, you take the best of what you see in available processes, Agile processes, and you craft them and manipulate them in ways that are best for your organization. And so that's what we've done. We hired a Scrum Master about 1.5 years ago who worked with me and the rest of the engineering leads to come up with the best approach for how we take things in, validate and understand what needs to be done and plan it, and then prioritize it and work with David and Nicholas as the founders of the company and the key stakeholders to make sure we're always moving in the right direction. We have service layers. We consider blockchain a service layer because everything sits on top of it. It's foundational. And then we have some other service layers that we have engineers that maintain those. Or we have some, for the most part, we've chosen open source solutions. and built what we would consider our intellectual property on top of that, or our things that are specific to our needs on top of that, and that way we keep licensing costs down. We allow ourselves to be as flexible as we need to for what we're developing. So we hire engineers primarily that can work within those open source solutions or frameworks.
What do you think has changed as we've matured as a company?
So we've gotten bigger, obviously. When we were a handful of people working day to day with David on how do we address the vision of what Ultra would be, it was a lot of sort of defining use cases and breaking down what is it we're going to be and what do we need, what are the building blocks we need, and what are the right people to own those building blocks that we need. Now that we have pretty robust teams in place, we're almost 70 people on the engineering side now, and we have a number of open roles that we're trying to fill. By the way, go to ultra.io and go to the job board, and you can see all of the job openings that we have, and we'd love to have you come work with us if you think you're qualified in those open areas, because at this point we're hiring constantly. I think probably in the dynamic of how you grow your team, understanding what roles you need, defining them well, having a good recruiting group to work with that can go source or find those roles for you, or deal with the candidates that are coming in and get them into a way that we can deduce as quickly as possible whether we think they'll be a good fit into our group. So they have the background, they have the desire to join a project like ours, which a project like this is amazing. I think is amazing for someone's career, because you get into a startup that's sort of gotten into the place we've gotten to, you're going to learn a ton. And so on that side, it's important to understand that we're bringing in people that already have pretty good experience, but now they're going to learn a ton because they're working on such a complicated, high velocity type project like this. So the most important thing we do is how we onboard people, because we're always saturating what we work on and develop. And so our engineers, let's say, are always saturated on the sprints and the work we're doing within the timeframes we're working. But we still want them to be able to do the interviews, judge if somebody is going to be able to work out well with us. And then once we hire them and they're starting, we want them to have a solid onboarding process so they come up to speed quickly. And we talk about capacity and velocity. So we add a person, we're adding to capacity. But once they become autonomous and able to start working with us and contributing to the project, then we're adding to our velocity. And so that's something we're always trying to improve, is our velocity. And that how well we do that onboarding is what increases velocity. And it allows someone to, say, come in and shadow another engineer or a product owner, and they gain knowledge by just sitting with them and working with them. And then we get to the point when they are starting to do their own thing and starting to contribute. They're always going to be working with other engineers, as an example, but they now represent what their point of view individualistically versus as a part of a pair, let's say. And so that onboarding process is really critical. And every time we onboard somebody, we come back to them and say, what do you think was good about the onboarding process and what was missing? And when they bring up the things that were missing, then we challenge them to go see if you can add that into the onboarding process, so the next group of people we bring in will benefit from that. There's tons of big companies that don't do that well, so we're trying to do that well at our size.
So that's actually, it dovetails nicely with the next question that I wanted to ask, which was, I've worked in a bunch of companies that were fairly dysfunctional, and Ultra has been, as far as I'm concerned, an extremely functional team. And I'm actually not really sure that I can identify what makes Ultra so functional versus what made, the previous experiences so dysfunctional. Do you think that you can identify like what makes for a good R&D team?
First of all, I talked about it earlier. It's not being authoritative and being flat. So David and Nicholas, as co-founders, co-CEOs, they're involved in tons of meetings at the executive level, but they're involved in tons of meetings with the groups of engineers and product people and designers that are working on our project. So it's flat. You don't, to get to talk to David, you don't have to go through, maybe 3 or 4 managers to then get, hey, David, as CEO, I want to ask you this question. You can get directly to him. We use Slack, for a collaborative tool that allows us to chat across groups or chat across individuals. That's helpful. I think we have just the right amount of meetings. We don't overmeet. That's a big problem too. Sometimes your whole job is about going to meetings and then you don't actually get any work done if that's what you need to do. So we try to balance that, not to overmeet. That being said, we still, like any company, we have a lot of meetings, but I think we're pretty effective in what's the intent of the meeting and what are we trying to get out of it and making decisions as quickly as we can. I think how we deal with change and how we deal with priorities is pretty logical and visible. And so that to me, that's helpful too. I should mention that just the fact that you're saying that we are relatively functional, which I would agree with. We were a distributed and remote team for the most part before the pandemic. And we had tools that allowed us to be that way. When the pandemic hit, I think the biggest challenge for us with the pandemic is those of us that would like to travel to meet in person couldn't. That was one thing. So we do everything we do virtually in little video boxes like this, and with whiteboards, virtual whiteboards, like we use Miro for virtual whiteboarding. Normally you'd be in an office and you'd whiteboard those that have a proclivity towards whiteboards, which almost every engineer has. So that was, we had to make sure we had the right tools to allow us to do the job, which for the most part we had in place before the pandemic. We had a percentage of our staff that would come to the office in Paris where they had social interaction, and so they're missing that. So we had to make up for that in quarantine virtual ways, which we did. We did some team building exercises that were, virtual gaming. We're a video game company at its core. I think a high percentage of people have a lot of passion for video games that are part of this company. So there was always, video game after work events going on and things like that. So I think that helped as well. But at the end of the day, there are very few big companies that can have a flat organization, and we are at our size able to pull that off, and it just allows us to be more functional.
So let's actually talk about that, because that's something that you talk about quite a lot, and it's not something that I personally have heard talked about in the context of other companies that much. Why the preference, and where did the opinion come from? Like, where did you really form that opinion about flat structure over hierarchy?
So have you ever had a boss that you knew didn't know how to do their job? And if those are hierarchical, then you're always detrimentally restrained from doing the right thing because your boss doesn't know how to do their job. So flat organizations allow you to have lack of bureaucracy around how you work with skill sets and work with subject matter experts, and not have to always get things checked off. Like I have people that work for me, and I manage them directly, but I also trust them that they have the capability and skill set to make decisions in their area of expertise. Now, they'll probably come let me know what's going on, or if they want to, they'll ask me a question. But I don't want to be in the middle of every decision they're making, and I don't want their people to be in the middle of every decision they're needing to make. It creates latency inside team dynamics. And actually, it works against Agile, because a lot of times when you get these small squads of engineers and product people working together, you want them to be able to be fluid in how they're coming to decisions and making decisions. So in a flat organization, supporting a flat organization is the ability to have solid collaboration. So you know that you're going to be working across team on some project that you're working on, and you know some back-end engineers are going to have points of view on this, front-end engineers, blockchain engineers, DevOps, whatever. And so you have to have the DNA that tells you that I'm going to collaborate with these people. I'm not looking for authorization. I'm looking for understanding what's going on with them. How does this relate to what they're responsible for? and how can we best collaborate so we make sure this moves in a positive direction as rapidly as possible. Because as with any company, our goal is to just keep increasing our velocity, keep increasing our ability to produce new features and new functionality and new services, and hit our timelines and all the normal things you do in a development company.
I think also one important aspect is that on one side you have the development team, but then on the other side you have the product team, and then you actually have the business, team. And while the organization is horizontal, everybody has their responsibility. So, for example, the developer is not deciding about a functionality and say, "Oh, I'm just gonna add that there because it's cool." So his job is to develop things and do it the best way for our particular needs and ask the questions for use cases and so on. The product owners team are basically deciding on kind of like how to describe the functionalities to the developer, like this is what we need, and then the business team is driving the functionalities that the PO. So we all work together, but there is a structure and there is a kind of there are some people that make certain type of decision because it's their role, and like business teams will make some certain decision and the tech team will make certain decision, and the business team is not going to tell the tech team how to do the stuff. They're just going to say the PO, we need that, and then the PO are going to talk to the developer, and then the developer is going to decide how he's going to do. So it's kind of like that's kind of like like an important aspect of having a working horizontal management style. Everybody needs to know what their role is and what their responsibility are.
Maybe you guys, from your perspective, can you talk a little bit about how we balance the demands of business, product, and technical? Because I think that like what you're describing is kind of like a machine that deconstructs business needs and then reconstitutes them into product and technical solutions. So
the desire for Ultra is to be UX driven. So we take the user experience into account. And so when we're looking at, we have a backlog, a big list of things we'd like to get done, and then we're able to balance that against what we think we can get done based on our capacity, and then we go through a process to prioritize what we're going to work on next and do some estimations on what we can work on. And there's a developmental science to that. We start with stories that the product owners create that allow us to understand what it is we desire to develop. And then we go through sort of a deeper breakdown on what can be developed, what are the interdependencies or requirements. If you're going to develop one thing, is that going to create a requirement in another area? So how do you balance and prioritize that? I think the thorough comprehension and communication between the business side and the technical side and the product side is of utmost importance to make sure that it's not the telephone game. We're not saying build A and then we go off and build X because it lost the reality as you went through it. And so there's tons of validation that we do as we go through that process. We do sprint reviews regularly that David and Nicholas sit through, and so they get to see what was developed, so they understood it when they first asked about it or when they reacted, because a lot of times a high percentage of what we develop are things we say we need to develop to have a platform and meet some of this higher level use case. And so some of these things were part of David, let's say, his vision or Nicholas's vision, and some are just rudimentary things we have to develop to allow functionality to occur. And so they get to see that regularly and give feedback on that. And so they're all, I think, the desire, and at this point, I think almost everybody that's on the business side sits through those sprint reviews as well, so they can actually see what's going on and understand it and know what's coming. I mean, our goal is to get to the point where we are good enough at predicting what's coming next over a set amount of time that we can actually publish those publicly, and say, hey, we're going to have a release on this date. We're going to have a release on this date and release on this date. This is what's going to be in there. And that's for a mature organization. That's our goal. There's some companies that do that really well right now. And we aspire to that. We aspire to be able to have things that are off in production where tons of good value for our partners, for our users, for us as a platform owner. And then we're iteratively adding to those with functionality that we've been able to accurately predict that we can do those things. This is a very big, complicated project. A lot of technical moving pieces, a high degree of innovative, revolutionary things that we're doing. And we are trying to make sure that we develop something that is going to be high performing, highly scalable, and at the end of the day, be great from a user experience perspective.
Where do you think we can still improve?
There are things going on in the world right now that make it hard to do certain things that I think would improve and enhance collaboration. I think we constantly look at ways we can collaborate better and get visibility better. I know something just happened through the reaction to the something that wasn't going right on the wallet-only client. And so we needed to address that from a developmental standpoint. And we needed to make sure that it was viewed with the criticality it should have been viewed with. And make sure, so that's a visibility issue and then a communication issue to make sure that everybody that should be aware is aware, and we can focus on it. Anytime when you're doing product development occurs that you can't lay down immediately to a root cause, then you have to do exploration on what's causing it, get the root cause, and then figure out how you're going to fix it. And sometimes that crosses domain areas. You have to have proper handoff to say, this looks like it's at the DevOps layer, so we're going to have the DevOps team look at this. And then DevOps does its deconstruction and realizes, okay, this is somewhere in the back end, or this is somewhere in blockchain. And making sure that the knowledge transfer and the handoff occurs and the ownership occurs at each area. That's all, it sounds really process-based, but it's actually fairly intuitive when you actually work through it. That, yeah, we want the right knowledgeable group working on this with the right data that they need to know to understand what could be fixed and should be fixed, and then how to get it out into what's in production, into the user community, so that we can do it as quickly as possible. Every development team goes through those growing pains or maturation to make sure that they just constantly are getting better in those areas. Because at the end of the day, developing software it's a science, but it's not a precise science. You know, you're in a lot of areas you're experimenting with new things. We do try a bit of that, and so you're learning as you go. So how you adapt and learn as you go is probably always something that's going to be needed to improve.
To be honest, like when we launched the wallet, there were issues, but the team had been really very reactive to it. Everybody stayed up very late for certain, and they actually fixed the problem quite fast, even though there were complex problems to identify. It's going to be a constant progress up until, Ultra would have been through most of these new steps, and then we would be more in kind of like a cruising speed, and then it would be all about growth and improving, optimizing, and starting to really grow the company further and having a focus on pure growth.
Especially as the market around us moves so quickly, especially we're in blockchain. We're in gaming, and the pace of those markets is frankly insane. There's a lot of changes that happen, and we have to adjust for them as we're already implementing what we had planned, 3 months ago or 6 months ago. I think there's an interesting question there about how we stay on course, and when we don't, how we make that decision that we want to change tech so that we can achieve what our actual goals are while we're still positioning towards that new target.
The good news is I don't believe so far we had to change tech. like okay, we change, oh, we choose the wrong database, we choose, like, so far every major tech that we selected was the right one. Like, one example is, I've seen like a comment on Twitter, somebody asking about whether Chrome was the right decision. Chrome was absolutely the right decision for our client for many reasons. And maybe we will get back to this later, but it's a matter of our future plans. And it's a matter of a strategic positioning. But then when it comes to the reality of the market, trends appear, trends come and go, and you need to react. And we sign a deal, and in this deal, it's maybe a great deal, it's going to be fantastic, but there's this thing that we don't have that they need. And so suddenly we need to kind of like balance, okay, so in that particular date, there's this thing that's going to happen, and we're going to do this partnership, it's going to be fantastic, but we need this functionality. What do we change from our current plan? But the workflow that and the work method that Mike has put in place is designed to allow updates. So every kind of like quarter, we're gathering all these multiple teams that are working on deciding what's going to be our next milestone content. And that's the moment where you can kind of like change course on certain decisions. So every quarter we go through this, and all tasks are being analyzed in terms of how much work, what kind of team are involved in them, and so on. And so that's when you can say, well, I got this new business that needs to be done at that thing, and I need this NFT functionality, and okay, we can change that and reprioritize it.
It's refreshing to hear David talk through what we built, because that's fantastic. Having any member of our executive team that can understand what goes on, because for the most part, David's highly involved with the R&D team, has been from day one. He and I partnered when I first joined, and I spend probably most of my time working with David or working with some of my key reports. And I think we have a good process. I think we're pretty mature in that area, probably ahead of the curve as far as how long we've been around and the size of our team. So I think we deal with how we articulate what we're going to work on, how we prioritize, how we deal with change, how we're ready to meet with competitive landscape or partner desires or anything like that, but how we still stay the course and what's valuable for what we have envisioned that Ultra will be, and building towards that and stepping away at that as we build it. I think we don't get sort of too lost in what's going on, let's say, in the blockchain ecosystem, because we feel pretty comfortable with the decisions we've made so far. Again, the fact that we're carbon neutral and certified as such in compared to everything else that's going on in the blockchain ecosystem really stands on its own. It's very promising. When we meet with partners, that's big partners, that's probably one of the most important things that we get asked about. How our platform will ultimately benefit game developers, game publishers, game players, and other partners we may have is going to be critical. Those are things we need to develop to ensure that we can support all of those. Speaking of support, because we've just started to make things publicly available, we're maturing our support process right now, and so we have we call them subject matter experts, but we have a subject matter expert that's responsible for support. Like we have one that's responsible for security, and so they sort of end up learning the entirety of the project in their domain area, and then they're that go-to person for how we're going to do things, and we work very closely on how we're going to mature and grow when we do those. When we need to do add those capabilities. So I think we've done a good job up to this point, but there's always room for improvement, and we have a very engaged executive team. We meet constantly. We talk through things constantly. We look at things from both a strategic and a tactical perspective. And we're growing not only on our R&D side, but we're growing on our business side as well. So it's we're going to be able to continue to meet what we'd like to meet from a public production perspective, getting things out and getting things into users' hands.
So let's go ahead and start taking some of the questions from the community. I'd like to start with seeing that a lot of new blockchains go under the water when real traffic hits. How do you assure that Ultra can handle user peaks of 500,000 users at the same minute with our infrastructure? Those peaks are often the problem. Mike?
Sure. So we do tons of capacity and stress testing across our platform, across our blockchain network. That's been a major focus for us. So we started with knowing that we'd have to be high performing, low latency, high capacity, fault tolerant, all the normal buzzwords that you think of when you're going to launch a big application or a big system. And so we've done the testing as best we could in a non-production environment as we're going out. I do know that from my background, the spikes are what get you, or the peaks are what get you when you plan something. So in some platforms, you have to over-architect almost to make sure that you're going to be able to handle the normal load that you get, and then when you have the spikes or the peaks, that you're not going to fault at that point. So that's, I think at the end of the day, we're a blockchain company, but we're building a platform that's going to be as high performing, fault tolerant as we can, and we've chosen the technology solutions that we have with an eye towards being at that high scalable capacity to begin with, even though we'll throttle and grow slowly as we go. We're focused on it. Obviously, we're concerned about it, but we've seen what's happened in the past. It's not an area that gets ignored at all. It's the scalability side of what we need to produce.
Can your NFT's implementation be used by developers or publishers of existing larger titles to upgrade a current game, or will it require implementing from ground up for fresh titles?
We have a SDK that we're currently integrating NFTs in. So basically, today, most games make use of SDK to integrate a lot of standard functionalities like messaging, achievements, in-app purchases, and all of that. So this is basically one base SDK that we have that supports all of these functionalities. And on top of that, we're adding now the NFT support. So this SDK, you can integrate it in any game for PlayStation, Xbox, Windows, iOS, Android, and we'll provide you these functionalities in these games. So it doesn't matter whether it's a new game or old game, as long as you put the SDK at one point in time, you can start using the functionality this SDK provides. Absolutely. And we're seeing a lot of interest by game developers to kind of like providing or developing a new version of an existing popular game, kind of like to extend their life. There are many games that have been through ages. Like if you look at a game like EVE Online, it's been decades that it's running, and year after year they keep reinventing themselves. And I think, for example, NFT would be a new way to reinvent the game and bring again interest in it and kind of like give it a new twist, the same way they've done countless times. Every time they extend the game with new functionalities, a new paradigm, a new this, a new that. And so our SDK is designed to allow that, whether it's a new game or existing game.
David, I am all in for NFTs on EVE Online, just for the record.
I mean, it would be a perfect fit. It would, obviously, yeah, with its own economy and so on, it would be a perfect fit, for sure.
I might have a problem doing my job if that happened.
Okay.
Thanks to all the Ultra fans out there. We're always excited about bringing you more news, insider info, and in-depth details about what we're building, why we're building it, and how we believe it will shape the future of gaming and digital assets. To keep up to date with Ultra content, make sure to subscribe and like this video. See you next time, and keep it ultra chill.